There is a specific kind of stillness that happens in a person's body when they see something they cannot unsee. Not shock, not panic. Stillness. The kind that comes before both of those things. The half second where the brain has already processed the information and the body hasn't caught up yet. And the whole world narrows to the size of a laptop screen open on a kitchen counter while someone you love is in the shower 20 feet away. Darnell Prescott knows that stillness. He has lived inside it more than once. And the thing about that stillness, the thing nobody tells you when they tell you stories like this, is that it doesn't feel like betrayal at first. It feels like math. Like your mind is running a calculation you didn't ask it to run, checking a sum you didn't know you were keeping, and the number that comes back doesn't match the number you've been living with. And somewhere underneath the calculation, very quietly, something that used to feel solid stops feeling that way. That's where this story begins. Not with a confrontation, not with a dramatic unraveling, with a man sitting very still in a kitchen in Decatur, Georgia, looking at something he wasn't looking for, and choosing, for reasons he still doesn't fully understand, to close the laptop and make coffee instead. I want to be honest with you about something before we go further. I came into this story with a take. I thought I knew what kind of story it was. A man wronged. A woman who kept a secret too large to survive. A marriage that didn't stand a chance against the weight of what one person was carrying into it. That's not wrong exactly, but it's not the whole shape of it either. And the further I got into understanding what actually happened between Darnell and Colette Marsh Prescott, the real architecture of it, the decisions inside the decisions, the less certain I became about where the fault lines were supposed to fall. So I'll tell you what I found, and I'll tell you where I land. And you can tell me in the comments whether you'd have done any of it differently, because I think you might surprise yourself. The thing about beautiful confidence. Colette Marsh was the kind of woman who remembered your name correctly the second time she used it. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't. There's a specific feeling that comes with being remembered precisely, not approximately enough, by someone who had no particular obligation to pay that close attention. It feels like being selected. Like out of all the information available in a room, you were the piece that got filed carefully. Darnell felt that at a behavioral wellness conference in Atlanta, standing in a lunch line next to a woman in a cream blazer who was presenting the afternoon workshop and who, 40 minutes after their first exchange, used his name again with the same easy accuracy as the first time. He told his mother about her that evening. His mother asked one question: does she make you feel seen, or does she make you feel watched? He said he didn't know the difference. His mother said, that's the thing you need to figure out. He didn't figure it out. Not then. Not for a long time. They dated for 14 months. Long enough, by most reasonable measures, to know someone. Long enough to have moved through the early performance of a relationship, the version of yourself you curate before you trust someone enough to stop curating, and arrived somewhere closer to the actual person. Or so Darnell believed. Colette was good at closeness. She understood it intellectually and emotionally in a way that made her genuinely skilled at intimacy, at the listening, the remembering, the specific quality of attention that makes another person feel like the most important presence in a room. She had studied human behavior professionally. She understood the architecture of connection. What she had not told Darnell, what she had not told anyone in her life outside a therapist she stopped seeing 6 months before she met him, was that her relationship with physical intimacy was not what it appeared to be from the outside. It was not a character flaw she was hiding. It was a wound she was managing. There is a difference, and I want to name it clearly, because the difference matters to everything that comes after. Compulsive sexual behavior, what some clinicians now formally classify as a disorder, what others still debate the framing of, is not the same thing as infidelity in the way most people understand infidelity. It is not a choice the way most people understand choices. It exists at the intersection of early attachment disruption, neurological reward pathways that got calibrated wrong, and a coping mechanism that began as survival and calcified over time into something the person can't fully stop even when they want to. Colette wanted to stop. That is not a defense. That is a fact, and the story requires that you hold it alongside everything else. She had grown up in a home where her mother's emotional availability was conditional in ways that never got named aloud. There were no dramatic scenes, no obvious trauma, just a consistent, low-grade experience of reaching for warmth and finding something slightly cooler than warmth. Functional, present, but not quite all the way there. Colette learned, The way children learn things that never become conscious beliefs but become operating systems. That physical closeness was the fastest route to feeling real. Chosen. Held. By her mid-20s, the behavior had a shape she recognized but could not fully control. By the time she met Darnell, she had been in and out of therapy, had periods of genuine stability, had told herself with real conviction that she was on the other side of the worst of it. She believed that. I want to be clear, she believed that. She said I do to a man she loved, in a ceremony attended by people who loved them both, and she was not performing. She was not running a long con. She was a woman in genuine pain who had convinced herself, the way people in pain convince themselves of things that are partially true and partially necessary, that marriage would be the anchor that finally held. She was wrong about that, and the cost of being wrong about it would be paid by both of them. The first year was good. I want to say that clearly because stories like this have a way of making you revise everything backward, making you look for the signs that were always there, the cracks that were always showing, the version of events in which it was never going to work. The first year was genuinely good. Darnell was happy in the specific way that comes when something you didn't know you were waiting for finally arrives. He was attentive without being consuming. He made her laugh. He remembered the things she said in passing, the restaurant she'd mentioned wanting to try, the book her college professor had recommended that she'd never gotten around to reading, and followed up on them weeks later in ways that felt less like performance and more like he had simply been paying attention. Colette was, by her own private accounting, the most stable she had been in years. They bought a condo in Decatur. She got a promotion. He started talking, carefully, the way he did everything carefully, about the possibility of children. She didn't say no. She said not yet in a way that felt like yes. Eventually, and that's how he heard it, and that's how she meant it, and for a few months that felt like a future being built rather than a conversation being deferred. What was happening underneath that year, the thing Colette was managing alone, in the silence that existed between her public self and the therapist she'd stopped seeing, was a tension she kept expecting to resolve on its own. The behavior hadn't fully stopped. It had quieted. It had rearranged itself into something smaller and less frequent, and she interpreted that as progress rather than as pressure building somewhere she wasn't looking. She was managing. She just wasn't managing well. And the distinction between those two things, which can look identical from the outside for a very long time, is what the next 19 months would slowly make visible. What he found. He wasn't looking for it. That matters, not because it changes what he found, but because it changes what the finding meant. There is a specific quality to an accidental discovery. The way it arrives before you've had time to prepare a response to it, before you've decided what kind of person you're going to be in the moment of knowing. You just know, without warning, without the buffer of having suspected. Darnell had been looking for a restaurant they'd bookmarked together, a place in Midtown she'd mentioned wanting to try for their second anniversary. He opened her laptop because his phone was charging in the other room, and it was closer, and the browser opened to something that was not a restaurant. He sat very still. For minutes, approximately. Then he closed the laptop. Then he made coffee. Then he went to work. If you're half listening to this right now, I need you to actually pay attention for this next part. Because this is where the story stops being about what Colette did and starts being about something you may have lived through yourself. He did not bring it up for 11 days. 11 days of sleeping next to her, of having dinner, of answering her texts during the workday, of watching her laugh at something on television and feeling, simultaneously, the warmth of knowing exactly what her laugh sounded like and the cold, specific weight of what he now knew and had not said. He told me, and by that I mean the accounts I've read from people who've lived versions of this, the composite of stories that built this one, that the 11 days weren't about strategy. He wasn't deciding what to do. He wasn't planning a conversation. He was grieving, quietly, privately, in the middle of an ordinary life that was still going on around him. He was grieving the version of his marriage that had existed before he opened that browser tab. Because that version was gone. And you can't announce that kind of grief to the person who caused it. Not yet. Not when you haven't yet found the words. And not when part of you is still hoping the math comes out differently if you check it one more time. The conversation. On the 11th day, after dinner, he asked her to sit down. She sat. He talked. What he said was not angry. This is the part that surprised me most when I understood it. He was not angry in the way you'd expect a person to be angry in this moment. He was measured, careful. He said what he had found. he said when he had found it. He said he had been trying to figure out how to have this conversation for 11 days, and he still didn't know how. So he was just going to say it plainly, and she could respond however she needed to respond. She didn't respond for a long time. Then she cried. Not performed crying. Not the kind of crying that is a deflection or a management of someone else's reaction. The kind that comes from something finally being named out loud after years of carrying it alone. The specific release of a thing that has been held in silence for so long that the silence itself has become a weight, and the weight finally becoming language, even painful language, is a form of relief. She told him about the therapist she'd stopped seeing. She told him about the pattern, in broad strokes, in the outline of it, in the parts she had words for that didn't require her to say everything. She did not tell him how many times. She did not tell him how many people. She did not tell him how long it had been happening inside their marriage. She gave him a version of the truth that was accurate in shape and incomplete in almost every specific detail. And Darnell, who was not naive, who had grown up in circumstances that gave him an early and thorough education in the ways people protect themselves by revealing partial things, Darnell believed her. Not because he couldn't see the incompleteness. Because the woman sitting across from him was in genuine pain, and he had spent his entire life watching people he loved suffer without the language to name what was happening to them. And that recognition, that specific compassion, moved him past the calculation and into something older and less rational. He believed her because he wanted to, and because believing her was the only version of the next chapter that he could figure out how to live inside. 7 months. They entered couples therapy. Colette re-engaged her individual therapist, a different one this time, someone who specialized specifically in compulsive behavior and attachment disruption. The kind of therapist who doesn't let you summarize yourself into something more manageable, who keeps pulling the thread until you get to the part you didn't intend to share. For 7 months, by observable measure, things were better. Darnell felt the difference. He wasn't sure he trusted it entirely. There was a new layer of attention in him now, a low-level monitoring that hadn't existed before, and he wasn't proud of it, but he also understood it as a reasonable response to what had happened. He was not surveilling her. He was simply present in a way that included some alertness now. He went to the couple sessions. He was honest in them in ways that cost him something. About his own avoidance patterns, about the specific form his anger took when it came, which was not explosive but cold and controlled in a way that the therapist named carefully and that Darnell recognized with the particular discomfort of being seen accurately. Colette was working. She was genuinely working. And the work was real, and the progress was real. And the behavior had not stopped. I want to stay with that for a moment because it's the part that's hardest to hold. The work was real, and the behavior had not stopped. Both of those things were true simultaneously. This is not the version of this story that makes Colette a villain. It is not the version that makes her a victim either. It is the version that makes her a person whose disorder was more entrenched than 7 months of good-faith therapeutic effort could fully reach, which is not a character judgment. It is a clinical reality, who was also continuing to cause damage to someone who had chosen to stay and try, and who was not being fully honest about the continuing damage. The guilt was real. The behavior was real. The two existed together inside her, feeding each other in the specific way that shame and compulsion feed each other. The shame of the behavior producing an emotional state that the compulsive behavior was the fastest available route out of. She was not indifferent. She was caught. And the person who paid the price for her being caught was the man who thought they were building their way back to something. The second discovery. The second discovery was not accidental. That is the line in this story that changes everything. By the time Darnell found what he found the second time, he had been paying attention, quietly, without fully admitting to himself what the attention was, for approximately 6 weeks. Not obsessively, not in a way he was proud of, but in the way that a part of you that already knows something gathers, slowly and without announcement, the evidence to confirm what it knows. He found what he found, and this time he did not close anything. He did not make coffee. He did not wait 11 days. He stood in the kitchen of the condo they had bought together, with the particular stillness that he now recognized as his body's specific response to this specific kind of information, and he took out his phone and called his mother. 10:47 on a Tuesday night. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to not say anything until I'm finished." She didn't. He talked for 31 minutes. What his mother said. She said one thing, when he was finished. She said, What do you need right now? Not, I told you. Not, you should have listened to me. Not, leave. Stay. Do this. Don't do that. Just, what do you need right now? He said he didn't know. She said, that's okay. You don't have to know tonight. He sat on the kitchen floor, not dramatically, just because the floor was there and his legs had decided they were done, and his mother stayed on the phone and didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything in that silence. That particular silence between two people who love each other and have run out of words that help was the most honest moment he had experienced in months. The confrontation. He did not call it a confrontation later. He called it a reckoning. There's a difference. Confrontation implies two people meeting as adversaries. What happened when Colette came home and he was still sitting at the kitchen table at midnight was something more complicated than adversarial. It was two people who loved each other and had failed each other in different directions, finally being in the same room with the whole of it. He showed her what he'd found. He didn't explain it, didn't contextualize it, didn't soften the edges of it. He simply laid it down between them the way you lay down something heavy that you've been carrying too long. She didn't deny it. She didn't cry immediately this time. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she looked at him, and what passed across her face in that moment. He described it later, in the accounts that built this story, as something between recognition and exhaustion. Like a person who has been waiting for a door to open and is not surprised when it finally does, only tired of the waiting. She said, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. He said, no, it's not. And then neither of them said anything for a very long time. The architecture of what followed. What came next was not a single decision. It was a sequence of decisions, made under pressure, in the fog of a pain that didn't have a clean shape, by two people who were both trying and both failing in different ways. Darnell filed for separation, then withdrew it, then filed again. He moved out for 6 weeks, to a short-term rental in a neighborhood he didn't know, where he cooked badly and slept badly, and spent a significant amount of time sitting on an unfamiliar couch trying to figure out who he was in the version of his life that did not include the person he had built the last 3 years around. He went back, not because he had resolved anything, not because the anger had cleared or the trust had been rebuilt or some threshold of forgiveness had been crossed. He went back because leaving felt like abandoning someone in a burning building, and he understood, even knowing what he knew, that the fire was not something she had set deliberately. He went back because compassion, in his particular case, did not have an off switch, and he had not yet figured out whether that was a virtue or a wound. What Colette did during the 6 weeks. Colette entered residential treatment. This was her decision, made without Darnell's input and without expectation of what it would produce in terms of the marriage. Her individual therapist had been recommending it for months. The separation was the thing that finally removed the last argument she had been making to herself against it. Residential treatment is not what most people picture when they picture it. It is not a dramatic intervention. It is mostly ordinary time, structured, supervised, slow, in which the person is removed from the environment and the patterns and the accessibility of the behavior long enough to begin to understand what the behavior has been doing and why. Colette had, for the first time in years, nowhere to be other than present with what she was carrying, what she found there. And this is the part of this story I keep returning to, the part that refuses to let the narrative settle into something simple, was not a monster at the center of herself. She found a frightened person who had never learned another way. She called Darnell twice during the 6 weeks. He answered once. The conversation was brief, functional, and so thick with everything neither of them said that it lasted 4 minutes and felt like an hour. The relapse. He had moved back in. They were not reconciled exactly. They were in the same space, attending the same therapy sessions, navigating a cautious proximity that was not quite distance and not quite closeness, something suspended between the two. Colette had 3 months of the most sustained stability she had experienced in years. And then she relapsed. The relapse happened during a period when Darnell was traveling for work, 4 days in Chicago for a logistics summit that had been on the calendar for months. The physical distance, which should have been neutral, activated something in Colette's nervous system that the 3 months of stability had not yet taught her to manage. The old pathway, the old route to feeling real. When Darnell came home, he knew before she told him. He knew the way you know things when you have been paying the specific kind of attention that grief teaches you. The way a room feels different when something has happened in it. The way a person's posture carries information before their words do. She told him anyway. That part mattered to him. Later, when he was trying to make sense of the pieces, that she told him. That she didn't construct another version and present it and wait for him to find the seams. That whatever the cost of honesty was, she paid it this time voluntarily. It didn't change the outcome, but it changed the quality of the ending. The restraining order. What followed moved faster than either of them expected. Darnell left the condo and did not come back. He stayed this time, not a 6-week displacement, but a permanent relocation. He filed the paperwork for legal separation with the intention, finally clear and finally decided, of moving toward divorce. Colette, in the weeks following the relapse and his departure, destabilized in ways that her treatment team had been working to prevent and that her family had not fully understood was possible. She showed up at his apartment. Once, and then twice. The second time was at 1:17 in the morning. The second time involved a level of emotional dysregulation that Darnell had never seen in her. Not performed, not manipulative in the way he might have feared, but genuinely fractured in a way that scared him more than anger would have. He called her sister. Her sister called a crisis line. The crisis intervention team made an assessment. Colette was placed on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. What some states call an involuntary hold. What people who have been through them call, simply, custody, initiated not by Darnell's hand, but by the machinery of a system that activates when a person's distress reaches a certain visible threshold. She was in custody, not because he wanted her punished, because the person he had married had finally run out of the distance between who she was trying to be and what she was still carrying, and the collapse happened in public view, and the system responded the way systems respond. If you've made it this far, I want to slow down here, because I went through that sequence quickly, and it's the most important part of what I just said. He did not file the hold. He called her sister because he was scared for her, not at her. There is a version of this story in which Darnell is the protagonist who was wronged and who eventually drew a line and held it, and that version is true. There is also a version in which he is a man who loved someone whose disorder was larger than both of them, who stayed longer than most people would have stayed, who left when he finally understood that staying had stopped being an act of love and had become something more complicated, and who, even at the end, called the person who could help her rather than the person who could punish her. Both versions are true. That's the part one couldn't resolve when I started writing this. I'm still not sure I've resolved it. What the restraining order said. He filed the restraining order 3 days after the hold, on the advice of his attorney, and with a heaviness he described to his mother as feeling nothing like protection. It felt like an amputation performed on something that was already gone. The order named the condo, which he had signed over to her in the separation agreement as part of his decision to leave without a fight over property, as a location she was not permitted to approach him at, which given that he no longer lived there was primarily symbolic. It named his apartment. It named his place of work. It had her name on it in legal language. Colette Marsh Prescott. He told his mother he had to read that name 3 times before it felt like something he had actually done. His mother said, "You didn't cause her illness. You couldn't cure it, but you also can't carry it for her. That's not love anymore. That's something else." He said he knew. He said knowing didn't make the weight of it any different. What happened to Colette after? The 72-hour hold led to a voluntary extended stay at a residential facility, a different one than before, more intensive, with a treatment program specifically structured for the intersection of compulsive behavior and attachment trauma. She stayed for 41 days. She did not contact Darnell during those 41 days. Not because she was prohibited. The restraining order did not extend into the treatment setting's communication systems, but because her therapist helped her understand that contact, at this stage, would be for her comfort and not for his, and that learning to tolerate the discomfort of not reaching was part of the work. She did the work. I'm not telling you that to redeem her in a way the story hasn't earned. I'm telling you because it's true, and because stories that leave the person who caused harm as purely a cautionary figure miss something real about what human beings actually are. She did the work. And Darnell, for 100 miles away in a new apartment with an unreturned library book and a refrigerator he kept forgetting to fully stock, was doing his own version of the work, the slower, quieter kind that doesn't have a clinical name and doesn't happen in a structured setting, that is just a person sitting with the gap between who they were before something happened and who they are trying to figure out how to be after it. What Darnell learned. He learned that his capacity for compassion, the thing he had always understood as one of his better qualities, the thing that made him the person people called when something was wrong, the person who stayed, had a shadow. The shadow was this. He had confused compassion with responsibility. He had believed, without ever examining the belief, that understanding why someone was causing harm was the same as being obligated to absorb it. It wasn't. Understanding why someone is the way they are is an act of intelligence and humanity. Deciding that understanding obligates you to remain in the path of the damage is something else entirely. He hadn't known the difference. He knew it now. The thing nobody talks about. Here's what I want to add, because I think it's the piece most people never hear, and it's the reason I'm still turning this story over weeks after I first understood it. Darnell did not leave a bad person. He left a person with an illness that she had not yet recovered from enough to stop hurting him. Those are different things. And most of the conversations we have about situations like this, about betrayal, about marriage, about when to stay and when to leave, are built on a framework that assumes the person who caused the harm was choosing it in the way most of us understand choices. Colette was choosing it, and she was also not fully free. Darnell was compassionate, and his compassion was also enabling something that was hurting him. Neither of them was the villain the story seems to require. That is genuinely the hardest part of sitting with what happened between them. Not the discovery, not the relapse, not the hold. The fact that love was real on both sides, and the love was not enough, and the love was never going to be enough, and knowing that does not make the ending hurt any less. Actually, put whatever you are doing down for a moment. This next part is the piece everything else was building toward. The watch-through reward. Here is the thing I did not expect to find when I went looking for the moral of this story. Darnell is not bitter. I want to say that again because it's the thing that surprised me most. He is not bitter. He is changed, significantly, permanently, in ways that are still being mapped. But he is not a person who converted his pain into contempt. He did not emerge from this experience with a theory about what women are, or what marriage is, or what love proves about itself when tested. He emerged with a question. The question is this: when does love become a reason to stay, and when does it become a reason to leave? And how do you tell the difference from inside the feeling? He doesn't have a clean answer. He told his mother, in one of the conversations they had after the divorce was finalized, that he thought the answer might be different for every person and every situation, and that any framework that told you otherwise was selling something. His mother said, "Now you sound like someone who's actually been through it." He said, "Yeah, that's what it costs." The comment section ghost. I can already see the comment being typed right now. Why did he go back after the first discovery? That's where he lost me. He should have left then. And here's my honest response to that. Maybe. But the person who says he should have left then is making a judgment from outside the feeling. From a position that doesn't account for the specific way love complicates information processing. From a position that has probably never sat in a kitchen with someone crying in a way that isn't performed, carrying a pain that is clearly real, and had to decide, in real time, without a script, what kind of person you are going to be in that moment. Going back is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the most human thing a person can do. The question is not whether he should have gone back. The question is what he learned in the going back, and whether he came out the other side knowing something about himself that he couldn't have known any other way. I think he did. I think that's worth something. Even if the cost was higher than anyone should have to pay. The close. Colette was in custody for 72 hours. Then she was in a facility for 41 days. Then she was in recovery. Ongoing, imperfect, non-linear in the way recovery actually is when it's real and not the version presented in narratives that need a clean arc. Darnell's divorce was finalized 9 months after he filed. He kept the unreturned library book. He still hasn't figured out whether that's funny or sad. He thinks it might be both. The thing I keep returning to, the thing I almost left out of this because I wasn't sure I had the right to say it, is this. Nobody in this story was the person they appeared to be at the beginning. Colette appeared to be a woman who had it together, composed, capable, professionally accomplished, emotionally intelligent in ways that made other people feel more intelligent by proximity. She was also a person who had been running from a wound since she was young enough that she didn't remember a time before the running. Darnell appeared to be a man who stayed because he was strong enough to stay, steady, grounded, compassionate in the specific way that makes people lean on you without asking whether you want to be leaned on. He was also a person who confused compassion with obligation and nearly disappeared inside someone else's illness, trying to prove something about the kind of man he was. They were both more complicated than their roles. They were both doing something they had learned before they had the vocabulary to examine it. That's not an excuse for either of them, but it might be an explanation. And sometimes an explanation, offered without judgment, is the most useful thing a story can give you. The thing you take from this, the thing worth saving, the thing worth returning to the next time you're in a kitchen somewhere running the math on something you didn't want to find, is not a rule. It's a question. When you stay in something, whatever it is, whatever shape it takes in your life, are you staying because love is real and still has room to grow? Or are you staying because leaving would require you to find out who you are without the weight of someone else's crisis to organize yourself around? Darnell didn't know the answer to that question while he was inside the marriage. He knows it now. It cost him 3 years and one finalized divorce and a library book he keeps meaning to return. He says the knowing was worth the cost. He says he's still not completely sure he believes that. He says both of those things are true at the same time. If this story landed somewhere real for you, if there's a moment in it that hit differently than you expected, save this video. Not for general reference. For the specific moment. The one that made you go quiet for a second. Because that moment is probably telling you something about your own life that it's worth going back to. If you know someone who is in the middle of a version of this right now, someone who is running the math in a kitchen somewhere and hasn't yet decided what kind of person they're going to be when they put the laptop down, share this with them. Not as advice, just as company. And if you want to understand what actually happens in a person's nervous system when love and damage get fused together the way they did for Colette, if you want to understand the mechanism beneath the behavior, not just the behavior itself, that video is next. Because what happened to her didn't begin when she met Darnell. It began much earlier than that. And understanding where it began changes everything about how you see what happened between them. Subscribe if you want stories that don't resolve cleanly, that don't tell you how to feel, that respect your emotional intelligence enough to leave the complicated parts complicated. That's what we do here. Drop something in the comments. Not he should have left sooner. Though you can say that if you mean it. I want to know this. Was there a moment in this story where you recognized something from your own life? Not necessarily the specific situation. The feeling. The specific feeling of knowing something you're not ready to say out loud yet. Write it down. Even just here. Especially just here.